We started at like 5:30. Caleb came home and pulled 16 feet up, and I'm like, she had to like refine it with finish.
Now in session with the Honorable Kwame Rowe presiding. Thank you. You may be seated.
Your Honor, calling People versus Ethan Crumley, case number 2022-279-506 FC.
Thank you. Appearances for the record.
Karen McDonald on behalf of the people.
Thank you, Mark Heast on behalf of the people.
I'll have Michelle Lawson on behalf of Ethan Crumley.
Amy Pop on behalf of Ethan Crumley.
Rachel McKelvey on behalf of Ethan Crumley.
Thank you. You may all be seated. Before we begin, I would note that the court did shorten the lunch period here to make sure that we can hopefully finish the proceedings this afternoon. If anyone needs to step out to eat additional food, the court will allow that. However, we need to conduct these proceedings efficiently and forthwith. And so, with that, people, you may call the next individual that wishes to speak.
Thank you, Judge. Miss Olivia McMillan.
Thank you. Thank you, and good afternoon, ma'am. If you could, please state your name.
Olivia McMillan.
Thank you. You may go ahead and proceed with your statement to the court.
I've thought about what I might say for almost 2 years now at the time of writing this statement. I don't think I could ever put into words or will ever be able to put into words the emotions I've gone through since that cold, icy day of November 30th. Desperation, numbness, guilt, fear, grief, loss, anger, hopelessness, yearning, the list goes on. I don't even know where to start or how to start. Since 2018, at the young age of 13, I've feared school shootings. I observed the harsh realities of the Parkland shooting through Snapchat videos taken in classrooms as they were surrounded by their dead friends and peers. I was so fearful of this happening to myself, my friends, my classmates. I had vivid nightmares, took the drills and lessons in schools about what to do in these situations very seriously. I always knew where the nearest exit was, in a new room, building, choosing my seat carefully, and paying attention to who was around me in public. This was all before. But I entered high school, a new environment, new friends, new classes. Everyone talks about how wonderful high school is supposed to be, how it's supposed to be some of the most pivotal moments of your young life. I was lucky enough to make some friends who truly made it feel like these were the moments you live for. Justin Schilling was one of those friends. I've known Justin since the beginning of middle school. We rode the same bus. He was the last stop in the morning and the first stop in the afternoon. He had a big smile with these round cheeks and crooked teeth. We weren't anything more than acquaintances at the time. We had mutual friends, probably talked here and there on the bus, but there was nothing more than that. It wasn't until the beginning of our freshman year that a friendship started to flourish. He still had the same big smile and crooked teeth. He was such a light to be around, always doing something to make you laugh, wishing you good luck on whatever sporting event you had going on, helping you with your homework, asking about your day, the list goes on. I've been friends with Justin for well over 5 years now, and words will never be able to describe him. I can say how charming, funny, sarcastic, encouraging, and wise beyond his years he is, but these words only demonstrate an inkling of Justin and who he is. I had just walked into my AP statistics class around 12:49-ish. I remember I sat down, texting one of my friends, playfully complaining about one of our other friends that I had just seen in the hallway. Right then, my class heard shots. I looked directly at my teacher, and my brain was telling me it was a senior prank. Someone was slamming or banging on the lockers. It was something along those lines. My teacher was closing the door because she didn't want to deal with whatever prank was going on outside in the hallway. It was far from a prank. I don't know when my brain flipped and knew that I was in danger and began to move desks, tables, chairs, filing cabinets to barricade the door. I don't know when my brain told me to get someone to hand me my big metal water bottle just in case we needed to fight. I don't know when my brain told me to text my parents. And I don't know when my brain told me to text the group chat with 3 of my other best friends in it. But I did. I wanted to make sure they were okay. Justin was in that group chat. I sent a simple text, "Are you okay?" just asking if he and my other 2 friends were safe. The response we got still makes me sick to my stomach. Justin told us he was in the bathroom with the shooter, and the next text we got from him after was, quote unquote, "I love you guys." Little did I know that would be my last text I ever received from Justin. I didn't think he was dead. I really didn't. I believed he was going to be okay. From what I was being told, I knew it was most likely going to be a difficult recovery, but I believed for another 20 hours that he was going to be okay. I was planning on going to the hospital in a few days to visit Justin, hang out with him, and help him through this, just as he's always helped me with whatever I needed and whatever I was going through. The night after the shooting, I was sat in my room alone. There wasn't a future that didn't have Justin in it. He was going to get better, and he was going to continue to tease me. He was going to go to prom with us. He was going to graduate and walk across the stage. probably brag about all his honors and rewards that he was going to get. We were going to celebrate it. He was going to be there for our last summer before college, swimming, bowling, having bonfires, taking film photos, and then after that experiencing college and making years of memories. From the day I met Justin, I knew I wanted to be his friend, and as I got to know him, he became more than just a friend, he became family. I knew he was going to be in my life for years to come, I just didn't know it was only going to be as a memory. He wasn't able to finish his senior year, he wasn't able to go to prom or graduate. It was ripped from him all in one of the most horrific and gruesome ways possible. I dream of what could have been. I have vivid nightmares of what has happened and what could happen. If myself and my classmates were gunned down in our high school, what makes that any different from going to a grocery store or on the street or a coffee shop or a restaurant? There isn't a difference. I don't trust people anymore. Anyone walking by in a car sitting 2 seats over, I don't trust anyone in any circumstances. Noises, I wonder if it was a car. Why are there so many sirens? Was that a gunshot or just a bang of a dumpster, the crash of metal? Or maybe a pop of an old banged up car driving by. Or at least that's what I hope. I try to lay down at night and escape the real world, but I can't. It's almost worse as I try to fall asleep. Sleep paralysis haunts my nights. All my fears and anxieties I've been pushed down throughout the day come full force in the most nights, paralyzing me in fear, not allowing me to sleep peacefully. Peacefulness never comes. I believe that the defendant should be given the maximum sentence, life without parole. I never want to see the defendant or hear about the defendant ever again. The defendant took the lives of Hannah St. Juliana, Tate Meir, Madison Baldwin, and my best friend Justin Chilling. And they will never be able to experience the world, so why should the defendant? Now I only have memories of Justin because of the defendant's actions, and I would like to share one. For those who have known Justin, knew that he gave the best advice, even when you didn't ask for it sometimes. While I struggle to remember every piece of advice he's ever given me over the years, I wanted to share this one. Quote, "There's no reason to be sad because it all doesn't matter. Life will end. And that's why you can't care about everything, you know? Just care about what makes you happy because that's all that matters. Because in the end, we don't have much time. So do what makes you happy." And that was from Justin Chilling.
Thank you, and I'm sorry for the loss of your friend, but thank you very much for your statements this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Next is a minor judge.
Thank you, and if again we could please turn away the camera and no photographing of minors. Thank you, and good afternoon to you. Because you're a minor, you do not have to say your name for the record if you don't want to, but of course if you want to say your name, you're more than welcome to do so. With that, you may proceed with your statement this afternoon.
Thank you. I'm Frederick Shephard. Thank you for letting me speak today, Your Honor. If I could, I would like to address the defendant, or offender, sorry. I wanted to clarify to you one small thing before you go and spend the rest of your pointless waste of a life sitting there with nothing left to rot away to. I know that through all of this, you desperately wanted to be remembered as one of the school shooters. I know you wanted to be loved and cared for from the awful things that you did, but you have never been loved, you have never been cared for, and you will never be remembered. You may attempt to convince yourself that you have finally got your way, that the world, or more importantly, your parents are finally able to see just how messed up you are. But even to this day, nearly 2 years later, they don't. Once they found out what was happening that godforsaken day, they did not care about you. They didn't text you to find out if you were okay. They never called just so they could hear your voice. They never said the words, "I love you." And once the dust had settled, they didn't attempt to find their child, who had supposedly just been through the most traumatic experience of their life, but instead they ran. They ran as far away from you as they possibly could. When even your own two parents, who are supposed to love you and care for you, no matter what the world may throw your way, don't love you, you know you are unloved. You may think that in some small way, the news has to be remembering you. The news has to remember you any time they report on the story. But they don't. They do not care about the actions, but instead the consequences. They do not care about the person who committed the crime, but instead the people affected. You are simply a forgotten teeny tiny puzzle piece someone lost under the couch and never cared enough to find. You will never be remembered. Your microscopic brain may still believe that because you committed the heinous act of unthinkable violence in a public building that remains standing, you will be remembered and cared for. You will not. In 5, 10, 15 years, no one will remember you, let alone what happened in that building. They will not remember the predator, but instead the prey. They will not remember that one cold hell-like day a student had enough of this world and decided to take it out on innocent people, but instead the innocent lives who were cut entirely too short. You may think that in some incredibly small ways, the families who are yelling at you, insulting you, screaming obscenities at you, must care about you. They don't. They couldn't care less if it was you sitting in front of them or if it was someone off the street. They are not mad at you. They are not upset with you. They are not wanting to kill the person sitting there. They are mad at the situation. They are upset at the situation. They want to kill the situation. No one cares if you are a part of their life or not. Your speck of a brain may still believe that when the family speaks of their loved ones, they have to be reminded of you. They don't. When they speak of their loved ones, they remember the laughs, the cries, the ups, the downs, the in-betweens, and the love, not the fear, unsettlement, and sense of danger they had to endure in the last seconds of their life. They remember the beautiful, amazing lives they lived, not the horrendous last seconds they had to interact with you. You may still have the idea that by me standing up here in front of you, by me expressing all of this anger, I must hate you, which in your jumbled translation means I love you. I hate the feeling that every time I am somewhere in public, I need to have people constantly surrounding me, so I could easily blend in and escape. I hate the feeling that I constantly need to stand guard and constantly need to mark every possible exit, think through every situation, watch every single person that seemingly looks suspicious to me, just in case someone came in wanting to kill me. I hate thinking that every time I go to bed, there's someone just outside my window, someone who has been stalking me, waiting for the perfect moment to shoot me dead. I hate constantly being reminded of the hell that I endured. I hate seeing flashes when I close my eyes at night. I hate hearing bangs in my head. I hate hearing sirens. I hate picturing that hallway I was in. I hate that my trauma is all I can ever think about. I hate the position you have put me in. But I do not hate you, and I certainly do not love you. I remember giving my loving dog a hug and seeing my normally hyperactive boxer standing so still, staring up at me, seemingly knowing I was in pain and I needed her. I remember telling my new fish that I almost didn't make it home that day and wondering if my parents would have forgotten to feed them if I died that day. I remember the realization of what I meant to my family when my mom had to frantically search for me, her only child, knowing that if she lost me, she wouldn't have anything. I remember the care of my neighbors when they came and checked on me and gave me the smallest feeling of normalcy that I so needed. I remember the rush of love I felt when so many people in my life called me or came to see me, so they could comfort me and see my face. I remember the noisiness in my head as I desperately tried to make sense of what had just happened to me. I remember how wide my eyes were as I stared at the news coverage, how I snapped at my parents to keep the TV on while I sat there with a pillow, the button digging into me, motionless, zombie-like, staring at the footage of the room I had just escaped from. But I do not ever remember caring to learn who had done this to me, who had caused all of this for me, and I still don't. I remember hearing the initial gunshots, realizing something wasn't right. I remember paying attention to every bang I heard because I knew, though didn't understand why, it would be important at the dinner table conversation I would later have that night. I remember standing there, begging my guardian angel to let me in, to save my life, attempting to put a pathetic, desperate, scared baby deer look on my face, while I heard chaos erupting behind me. I remember the terror of the sensation of a bullet buzzing my head and the evasive thoughts that I had just evaded death itself. I remember hearing the first of the police to arrive and trying to convince myself, it's okay, I'm safe now, even though I knew nothing. I remember that god-awful feeling of my Fitbit vibrating viciously on my wrist, alternating between calls from my mom and my dad over and over and over again, while I stared at my backpack, housing my phone safely out of my reach. I remember listening to every single siren that passed, listening for the whoops, the wails, the honks, just so I could decipher between a fire truck, ambulance, and police car, in an attempt to calm myself. I remember the exact moment my parents stopped attempting to locate me, the exact moment it seemed every siren in Michigan was rushing past me, the exact moment I continued to hear gunshots in the hall, the exact moment I knew I was lost. I remember when I didn't feel anymore, when I was standing shivering yet warm in the exhaust-filled parking lot, finally on the phone with my mom, staring into a gray abyss scattered with flashing lights. But I do not remember you. I do not remember what you were wearing. I do not remember who you were. I do not remember where you came from. I remember the gun, but I do not remember the hand that pulled the trigger. And no matter how hard you try to convince yourself that somewhere out there must be someone who cares, there must be someone who loves you, there must be someone who remembers, you will never be able to, because even you hate yourself. You do not care for yourself, you do not love yourself, and you do not remember yourself. No one has, does, or will ever care for you, love you, nor remember you. You are an uncared for, unloved, and forgotten devil. Your Honor, I am done speaking to this thing. It chose to go down this path. It chose violence when there were so many better options. It chose to take 4 innocent young lives. If it is ever let back out into this world, who knows how many will be added to this list. If it can't be trusted once, how can it be trusted twice? If it gets anything less than a life sentence, the world and I will be in a constant state of fear, waiting for it to strike its next prey.
Thank you for your statements this afternoon.
Thank you.
Next speaker is a minor as well, Judge.
Thank you. The next speaker is also a minor. Thank you. Thank you, and good afternoon to you. You do not have to state your name because you're a minor, but if you wish to state your name, you may. But again, you don't have to. With that, you may proceed with your statement, and good afternoon as well, ma'am.
My name's Ashlin Sutton, and I'm a senior at Oxford High School. I wasn't physically injured on November 30th, 2021. You can't see my scars, but they are there. I was in the bathroom that day when the defendant emerged from the adjacent bathroom and started his rampage. Moments later, there were 5 girls in the bathroom. 4 walked out ahead of me and headed to class while I stayed back in the bathroom. After hearing the deafening noises, I came out of the bathroom stall to see those 4 girls and others, or I came out of the bathroom to see those 4 girls and others on the ground, bleeding and seemingly lifeless. That was when I realized what was happening and ran back into the bathroom to hide. Alone and terrified, I wiggled the closed-off handicap stall open and crouched behind the toilet in hopes of if someone came in, they wouldn't be able to see me. I called my mother, who stayed on the phone with me for the majority of the time I remained in the bathroom. On this call, I texted my friends that I loved them. After hearing the cries from my classmates outside the bathroom, I decided I had to go out and help. However, a security guard told me to get back in the bathroom. I couldn't hear what was being said on the intercoms, so as the minutes dragged on, I sat with my legs pushed up against my chest, shaking in fear that an active shooter still roamed the halls. Eventually, a plainclothes officer came into the bathroom. He didn't identify himself. I thought he was the shooter, so I did what I was taught and I stayed hidden. His footsteps came closer and closer to the stall that I was in, and suddenly he kicked open the stall door and pointed a gun to my head. I screamed, fell to the ground, and waited for the gun to go off. Instead, he identified himself as a police officer and led me out of the bathroom. He made sure that I did not look to my left as he quickly led me to the back door. I didn't look. I had already seen enough. The relief of realizing he was law enforcement did little to erase the trauma of that moment as I was let out of the bathroom, forever changed. The impact of that day has followed me through every aspect of my existence, casting shadows on what was a life filled with innocence. I was a sophomore and just 15 years old when this happened. Before that day, school was a place of growth and companionship. It was where I was supposed to feel safe, where I was meant to build a foundation for my future. But the events that unfolded and shattered that sense of security and left an undeniable mark on my soul. The emotional and psychological aftermath is an unrelenting torment. Post-traumatic stress disorder has become an unwelcome companion, invading the sanctuary of my mind with flashbacks and anxiety and a profound sense of vulnerability. The simplest of sounds, a door slamming shut, a distant shout, can trigger an overwhelming surge of panic, transporting me back to the terror of that day. Sleepless nights are plagued by vivid nightmares, and the stress and anxiety is often manifested by physical symptoms. Things that were once so simple became so difficult. I couldn't even walk into a public bathroom for months afterwards. Be left home alone for any amount of time, or make it through a school day without experiencing debilitating panic attacks. Relationships with loved ones have been strained as we all navigate the aftermath together. Simple joys are now clouded by the specter of once was, and the path to healing seems never ending. While I am grateful to be alive, the weight of survival is a complex and conflicting emotion. I feel a responsibility to honor the memory of those who were lost, yet the guilt of living when others did not is a heavy burden that I and others like me must bear. Your Honor, I humbly request relief from the duty that may one day require me to confront the defendant at a parole hearing. It is in my solemn plea that the possibility of parole be denied, ensuring he never has the opportunity to harm another person. As you deliberate on the consequences for the defendant, I implore you to recognize the enduring impact on survivors. Justice is not only about punishment, it is about acknowledging the depth of our pain, the strength it takes to endure, and the resilience required to rebuild shattered lives. Thank you for your time, consideration, and understanding of the profound impact this tragedy has had on my life. As a survivor, I want not only to talk solely of the pain, but also to emphasize the strength that can emerge from a tragedy. In the face of unimaginable pain and loss, I have discovered an inner strength that I never knew existed. It is a strength that has propelled me forward, allowing me to rebuild my life and find purpose amidst the chaos. May our collective experiences serve as a catalyst for change, a resounding call to address the root cause of senseless violence. Thank you.
Thank you for your statements this afternoon, and your strength definitely shines through your statements this afternoon, so thank you for those statements.
Next speaker is Miss Christina Nunz.
Thank you. Is she a minor?
No.
Thank you. And good afternoon, ma'am. If you could, please state your name for the record.
Yep, Christina Nunz.
Thank you. You may proceed with your statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. I will be reading on behalf of my younger sister. This is her statement. I'm currently a 17-year-old junior at Oxford High School. I wanted to reach out and share my story in order to make my peers feel less alone and to be an advocate for myself. New to Oxford, I was a freshman when the security of my school was broken. At 15 years old, I was put in a scenario where a classroom of less than 10 students and no teacher had to lock down. The first classroom behind the bathrooms, room 325, had 2 doors and little resources to use. However, as a group, we managed to move a filing cabinet to block the door, gather scissors, textbooks, and any classroom materials we could find in order to defend ourselves. I cried and hid under a desk while I called 911. Those who stayed in the classroom when the gunshots were fired were the students who, like me, responded by freezing in place. I remember sitting under a table, texting my sister, asking her to pick me up. Asking, I don't know if it's a realistic drill, but we heard gunshots and I'm scared. Could you pick me up when this drill is over? I remember writing notes to my family in case something happened to me. They were the first thing on my mind. I remember finding out that night through social media that a sweet girl like Hannah passed away. When I moved to Oxford, I didn't know anyone, but I'll never forget Hannah's kindness as she helped me brainstorm ideas that could help me fundraise for my project. Sweet suggestions of jewelry making and bake sales motivated me to branch out more at school. Her compliments in my math class always made me feel welcome. I owe her so much for making Oxford feel like home. No student should ever have to fear for their safety in school. For months after November 30th, I struggled with sleeping due to the nightmares I would have. I needed outside help for me to sleep. Now, at 17 years old, I still fear for my own safety at school and in public. I always look for the nearest exits in crowded places, and when I get stressed out, I have recurring nightmares of the shooting happening again. In order to move forward, I need to know that he will never have the chance to see my school again. This was an act of terrorism, endangering a crowded public space, instilling fear in a community, and leaving behind many victims who will have to deal with this event for the rest of their lives. The Oxford community is brave and loving. Please consider aiding us in granting the security, closure, and support that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your statements this afternoon. They're truly appreciated.
Thank you.
student's uncle who will be reading on his behalf.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir. If you could, please state your name for the record.
My name is Jeff Bean.
Thank you. You may go ahead and proceed with the statement.
Thank you. I'm reading today for my niece Imani Tenorio Penter, who was a junior at Oxford High School in November of 2021. Deputy William Bean has worked at Oakland County Jail for 36 years. He became a second father figure when I was 3 years old. I look up to him every day. And even though he has been a sheriff deputy for this long, I can confidently say that I have never heard a live gunshot until November 30th, 2021. That day was filled with loss. The loss of my best friend, the loss of trust, the loss of my childhood, and the loss of respect for a lot of people. I've been walking around the curb hall at OHS. I passed room 256 and kept going. I was supposed to be in room 242 that day, but instead, I was in 244. I did what an average high school student would do. I stopped in the hallway and talked with my friends before class. That is when I heard something I had never heard in my life. When I heard the second shot fired, I realized what it was, and it was terrifying. I was the last one to enter my classroom door, panicking and shaking. The window that was directly next to my head was shot out as I walked through the doorway. I slammed the door shut, ran into a desk very hard, which left my legs swollen for a couple of weeks. I was in the room with about 20 to 25 other students, no teacher, and a door that was unlocked. I felt fear, but I also felt a need to be strong for the kids in the room. At 12:51, I called 911, and my friend spoke to the operator. I was scared, hurt, in shock, and I could not for the life of me stop shaking. I left that school with nothing but disgust. Like everyone involved, I have my triggers that I must live with every day. I should not have to live with these triggers. I should be proudly in college with no fear that I will be hunted down. But I do have this fear. I am grateful for an amazing family of 5 who I look up to every day and who help me to heal. Sherry, Buck, Trent, Ty, and Tate are and will always be my role models. Tate Muir was killed on November 30th. And what did the Muir family do in the aftermath? They created an organization to help other kids like the shooter, so they have support, so this will never happen again. They're the strongest family I know. Helping others is what we should be doing. But instead, we're here today, trying to decide if the shooter should have life in prison with or without a chance of parole. This person should have life in prison with no chance of parole because Tate, Hannah, Justin, and Madison have no chance of going to college, no chance of getting married, no chance of having children, or even simply eating dinner at the table with their families again. I am overwhelmed by the unfairness these 4 families have to suffer through and the 7 who are going through a very long recovery process. The shooter stole something for which I will never be able to forgive him. I also know the shooter wants to see this terrible trauma students, staff, and our community members went through on that day. But what he needs to know is this: our community is way too strong to allow that. So instead, we fight for what is right. We open beautiful gardens. We build and create organizations. We continue to share our art. And we donate organs. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the statements this afternoon. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Next speaker is a minor, Judge.
Thank you. The next speaker is also minor. Thank you. Thank you, and good afternoon. Because you're a minor, you do not have to state your name for the record, but if you want to state your name, you may if you wish. With that, you may go ahead and proceed with your statement. And good afternoon as well, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Grace Vivano. this day, November 30th, I was 15. I could not even drive yet. What I was forced to go through and process a tragedy that no one should ever have to go through. And I never thought this would ever happen at my school. After this day, I couldn't sleep for weeks. I had a lot of survivor's guilt and was overall angry. I was angry that this day made a place that I loved to be at, somewhere I felt safe in, somewhere I hated being. I never wanted to step into Oxford High School ever again, but I wasn't going to let him take that away from me. Now whenever I go to other schools or anywhere else, the first thing that I look for is an exit, just in case this were to happen to me again. Just in case I'd have to run for my life again. And for the waste of a human that's sitting in this room with us, love will always win. You will be forgotten in a few years, and the 4 that you selfishly took away from us will live on. In your honor, I hope, because of the terror and disregard for human life, I hope you give him life without parole. Thank you.
Thank you for your statements this afternoon. It showed a lot of strength to be here, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Katherine Waymaster.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ma'am. If you could, please state your name for the record.
My name is Katherine Waymaster.
Thank you. With that, you may go ahead and proceed with your statement this afternoon.
Thank you. My name is Katherine Waymaster, but to 2 Oxford High School kids, my name is Mom. Excuse me.
Oh, you're fine, ma'am.
Neither of my children were physically injured on that awful day at Oxford High, so you might ask, why am I giving a statement? Well, victims come in many forms. On November 30th, I drove my daughter Danielle to school. My son, Danny's twin brother, Michael, was not feeling well and stayed home sick that day. I then drove to work about a mile down the road. A few hours later, a co-worker ran up to me and asked if I knew what was happening at the school. Her son had jumped out of a window and wanted her to come get him. In just seconds, our phones blew up with social media alerts. There was a shooting reported. I texted my daughter, "Are you okay?" She replied, "Yes, we're in a lockdown." I said, "Stay calm." She said, "We're in a lockdown?" At that moment, she and her teacher thought it was a drill. I said, "Keep your head. Do what your teacher tells you." She simply replied, "I'm scared." I ran out of work and headed to the school. I arrived in minutes before roads were closed and the bulk of the emergency responders had arrived. Their radio announced that a shooter was in custody. But of course, no one knew at that point if there was only one. I watched as hundreds of emergency responders arrived. I watched ambulances unload empty stretchers and leave with full ones. I watched as other parents tried to enter the building and be held back by police. I watched a SWAT team suit up in full gear to enter a building where my daughter was still in. My daughter was in a classroom less than 50 feet away from where the shooting began. She was huddled in a corner with her classmates, holding items to use as weapons in case the shooter came in. My daughter chose to arm herself with the star from the top of the classroom Christmas tree to use as a stabbing device. Let that sink in. We continued to text. My daughter was using her Apple Watch because her phone was across the room in a holder along with all the phones of her classmates. It was by the door. Phones were ringing and buzzing like crazy as parents were trying to connect with their kids. My daughter was in that classroom because she wanted to drop off her backpack before she went to the bathroom. She had just left her friends, Phoebe and Eli. They would walk together almost every day at that time. Had she not detoured, had she stayed with her friends, what would have happened? that weighs heavy on her mind. After some time passed, my daughter's classroom was evacuated. I then drove to meet her at the Myers Garden Center. As I rounded the corner of Oxford Road and Bray Road, I saw hundreds of kids heading to the safe place. Some running, many crying, holding on to each other. It's almost indescribable. I then turned into the store's parking lot. Hundreds and hundreds of parents were there. It was chaotic. By the front door of the store was a classroom of special needs kids. When I saw one boy there, the most innocent of innocents, looking around in utter confusion, I knew at that very moment that true evil had come into our lives. What conversation went on in that home that night, I can't even imagine. As for my daughter, it had always been her dream to become a teacher. Anyone who knows her would tell you she would make a great teacher. On November 30th, that dream stopped. The fear of having a student like the defendant scares her. She thought she knew him. They were in many classes together over the years. She saw no evil brewing in him. She's afraid she will not see evil brewing in students she might have as a teacher in the future. To cope, my daughter packs her days from sunup to sundown with activities. Quiet moments with time to think are hard. In the first few months, we would be up talking till 2 a.m, trying desperately to wrap our heads around why this happened. Being in crowds is difficult for her. The thought of living on a college campus frightens her. Loud, unexpected noises are hard to manage. Sitting in traffic is upsetting because there's no clear exit out of it. She struggles with maintaining concentration to complete tasks, and the list of impacts goes on. Excuse me. Although my son was not in school that day, he too has been deeply affected. He thought of the defendant as a friend. They played video games together in school when they had free time in class. The defendant would help him with homework in class. My son trusted him. My son trusted you. Now my son trusts no one. He keeps to a very small group of friends. He was not a fan of school before the shooting, and now every day is a struggle to get him to even show up. He hates being in that building. He dropped out of sports, moved to some online classes because he doesn't want to be on campus any longer than he needs to. He can't wait to be done and graduated this spring. Mike has decent grades. Imagine what he could accomplish if he actually wanted to be there. My son, like a lot of the boys from Oxford, struggle with controlling anger, and his emotions are extreme. Oxford is a small town community, has a small town community feel. It seems that everyone kind of knows everyone. So many notable things have happened to my circle of friends because of these events, and I'd like to share a few. The kids of Oxford School were forced to leave their belongings in school that day. Hundreds of cars remained in the parking lots because the keys were in the backpacks they left behind. One friend's son held vigil over his dead friend's car so no one would mess with it while it was parked there. At a town vigil, a sound system crackled, sent the crowd running in all directions. A co-worker of mine was trampled and broke her collarbone. I found my kids huddled in fear in the basement of an old building. My friend's daughter refused to go anywhere without a support dog by her side. Another friend of mine had 4 kids in the school at the time. She described her home as a minefield, because she never knew what kid would break down at any given moment. Another friend's daughter desperately wanted to return to school. She would drive there, but she sat in her car in the parking lot for hours, too afraid to go in the door. Sadly, she was not the only one sitting in the car trying to work up the courage to enter. Another friend's son had given the shooter a friendly "what's up" fist bump as they passed each other in the hallway minutes before the shooting began. He's racked with guilt, wondering if he could have stopped it all. Another friend's daughter-in-law was in her second year of teaching when the shooting happened. She quit her job, and she feels like her whole time in college was a waste, as she will never return to teaching. Every student enrolled at the time now has an asterisk on their school transcripts that denote grades or test scores unavailable due to school shooting. Neighboring communities have been so supportive, but that too comes with problems. Every sporting event, every competition, concert, meet, collaboration, get-together began with soft, thoughtful words and moments of silence. Our students would have to try and perform. It was like, "Hey, your friends are dead. So sad. Play ball." How many scholarships were lost? We'll never know. A rift has emerged in this community over how the school is handling things. It's ugly and it's sad. There's a saying, "I hope I don't look like what I've been through." Our kids are desperately trying to act like normal teenagers, yet in the back of their heads, this event taints every moment they try to enjoy. I have a lot of parent friends, and each one of us has one or more children grieving in so many different ways. It's heartbreaking. I feel that each of these kids deserve justice. There were nearly 1,800 students and staff in the building that day, nearly 300 first responders, and hundreds of parents like me all left to pick up the pieces of the defendant's quest for fame. On the count of terrorism, I ask this court to sentence Ethan to the maximum allowed, and I want to thank you for this consideration. After I wrote this statement, my daughter was asked to write an essay at school, and I would like to include the words that she wrote. She had to write a statement of something that changed her mind or changed her perspective. And this is what she wrote. "Since I was a little girl, I've always looked up and wanted to be a teacher. I remember playing in my bedroom with a school desk, making my friends be students, pretending to teach them. I can remember asking my sister to buy me a microphone so I could talk into it just the way that teachers did at school. I've always looked up to my teachers and have always wanted to become one. The way they connected with my peers and myself inspired me to pursue teaching as a degree. Unfortunately, a day came when my whole dream changed. On November 30th, a lone gunman and fellow classmate walked into Oxford High School and in just a few violent moments nearly ended my dream. For a long time I felt isolated and not sure if teaching was the right career for me. I felt I was alone and I would never be able to protect students if I was in the teacher's shoes. I started to explore other degrees, but nothing sparked me the way that teaching always has. I soon realized that I could not let the actions of one troubled individual stifle my passion for teaching. I know I will always have uneasy feelings walking in public spaces, such as schools, malls, movie theaters. This event has left a permanent scar on my mind. But since this time, I have found the love for teaching again. I have shadowed many teachers. I feel that if anything is to occur, I would be able to protect those students rather than anyone else. I have now been accepted to OU for elementary education, and I would not change a word. Thank you.
Thank you. First off, good luck to your daughter at Oakland University. Thank you for your statements this afternoon, as well as the statements of your daughter. I listened very closely, so I truly appreciate that, ma'am.
Thank you.
One moment.
Yes.
Judge, our advocates are going to confirm that nobody else is here to read. A minor student did ask that I read his statement for him.
Thank you. You may proceed.
His initials are EK. November 30th is a day I will always remember. November 30th completely changed my life. Never in a million years did I think I would be standing here today talking about the impact the school shooting at my school had on me. I shouldn't even need to be here. But on November 30th, that all changed, and that distant thought became my reality, as well as everyone else in the Oxford community. Everyone knows what happened that day, so I won't share anymore, but I will tell you exactly how this boy changed my life. Ever since that day, I have constantly tried to find ways to heal and live with this new reality of life. What is this new reality? This new reality of life all stems back from the events that took place that day. I feel as if I can't live a life without worrying or being afraid of reliving what happened on November 30th. The thoughts of reliving that day haunt me. I think about it all the time, and that is something that shouldn't happen. I'll go to class and I'll constantly look for an exit. I'll be at a party and I watch everyone and not be able to have fun because the constant thought of something going wrong will always be in the back of my mind. Those events took my innocence in a way that I will never be able to get back. I used to be able to have fun and enjoy every moment of everything, but now I struggle to have fun because one individual took that away from me. At times, I hate that I am the way I am. I want to be able to have fun and live a normal college experience. But instead of having fun, I feel like I need to be proactive in case something happens, and I need to protective in case something happens. I need to get my people that I love out. Another big thing that hurts is when I go home from school, I expect to hang out with all of my closest friends from high school. Many of them I can and still do hang out with. However, one of them got taken away from us. And instead of hanging out with him, I hang out with his family and remember him and all the good times. Or I go sit at his grave. When I'm around anything or anyone that reminds me of Justin, I get overwhelmed, as if he's there with us, but not physically. Even though it feels good to know he's there, it's still the hardest part. On that day, not only did I lose one of my best friends, but I also lost a teammate and one of my mentors. I played football with Tate and was on the verge of quitting, but if it wasn't for him and another teammate, I would have lost so many amazing memories and things I will forever hold. In the locker room, I see how Tate led everybody, and even throughout the school, I strive personally to lead like him. At the time I was 18. An 18-year-old should never have to experience the events that my community and I experienced. Nobody should, ever. Now, almost 2 years later, I still struggle with the effects and feelings that I developed after that day. As for sentencing, I feel like all of the community wants only one thing, which would be for this boy to be sentenced to life without parole. To end off my impact statement, I just want to say that this is very hard for me. Not because of the person sitting across the room with handcuffs, but because it's hard to relive everything that happened over and over again. I also never wish this pain on anybody else, and I could never imagine how the families feel, and I think about them daily. I love everyone in the community and will never forget. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Case.
Judge, we have no further victim impact statements.
Thank you. With that, counsel, please approach. With that, we're going to take about a 10 to 15 minute break. To those in the gallery, please be seated until the defendant has left the courtroom. As I indicated, when we come back, I will hear from the people, I will hear from the defense. At that time, then the court will give it to ruling. With that, deputies, you may take the defendant. Thank you. With that, court stands in recess.
All rise.
Amy, can you just watch the cord? Before I break something and have everybody angry at me. Oh, I think the tables are too close to each other.
Oh, that's way heavier than I thought. Oh, yeah, that is not moving on my ability, so. Do we just leave it here? I don't know, we don't want to stand on top of the judge?
It isn't going to take much, actually. Yeah, it'll fit. What's the blue wire, though? I don't know what the blue wire is, so I don't want to pull it out. I don't know what the blue wire is. Can you, okay. Is that about, is that good?
I have an extra.
Oh, there it is. I got it. Yeah, I got it.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Your Honor, calling People versus Ethan Crumley, case number 2022-279-506 FC.
Thank you. Appearances for the record.
Karen McDonald on behalf of the people.
Thank you. Mark Keast on behalf of the people.
Paula Michelle Lofton on behalf of Ethan Crumbley.
Amy Happ on behalf of Ethan Crumbley.
Deborah H. McKelvey on behalf of Ethan Crumley.
Thank you. With that, you may all be seated. With that, people, you may proceed with your allocution.
Your Honor, we presented extensive evidence at the Miller hearing. I know the court has read our briefs. I do not intend to make any of those legal arguments here and rely on the testimony and the briefing that we did during that hearing. I do need to address, however, newly additional arguments that the defendant made in his sentencing memorandum, referencing the guidepost report and essentially placing the culpability on the school officials. I want to say that there's not any dispute based on that report and all of the other facts that we know that there were numerous failures on that day by various individuals. But none of those failures diminished defendant's responsibility and the culpability for the decisions that he made up to and during the school shooting. And in arguing that other actors should have done more to intervene and stop him from his own planned, conscious actions, defendant fails to acknowledge that he consciously chose not to reveal his plans and that he, along with his parents, sought to cover up the fact that his parents had just bought him a gun. And finally, all of those were decisions, there were numerous decision points where he had an opportunity to choose another path, had an opportunity to say, I want help, I'm planning on shooting this school up in that office. Despite the failures that occurred that day, I do not believe that it is, I find it hard to stomach that those arguments could be used during these proceedings to somehow take the culpability away from the defendant. The court heard from some of the victims during the Miller hearing. However, as the defense argued and objected numerous times, it was not a victim impact statement. That hearing was indeed not about victims, not about hearing from victims. It was about the defendant and his actions. Your Honor, today was about victims. Today we learned their names, their faces, and we heard their voices. It's been 2 years. 2 years. The statements made here today are just a small portion of the victims, and their statements are only brief, but they reflect hundreds and hundreds of others. I'm not sure if the court is aware, but there were a lot more victims who initially intended to give their oral statements, and as today approached, and even today, decided that wasn't something that they could do, which is further evidence of the trauma. It's impossible to give anyone a realistic description of what the last 2 years have been like for these students, brothers, sisters, teachers, dads, moms. It takes courage to stand before the court in this room and relive the most painful thing that has ever happened to someone. It will take courage and grit every single day for the rest of their lives. We will all go home when this is over. But for these victims, there is no going home because their loved one is not there. And their kids are forever changed, injured, traumatized, and working to get through each day, as you heard every single one of them tell you. There were common themes from these students. They don't trust anyone anymore. They don't trust any place anymore. They don't think they're safe. Some can't sleep. Some have to sleep in their parents' room. There's a deep, deep loss of safety, loss of loved ones But most importantly, what I heard was they lost themselves. And they're working very hard to find who they were, with the acknowledgement that they will never be the same. And these are people who don't have a scratch on them from that day. Unfortunately, the data and the research support what you heard today. Escaping without a physical harm, we know, for hundreds and thousands of children and educators who survive these tragedies carried out, leave scars for years to come. And the research is abundant that there is long-term detrimental impact of such childhood trauma on a person's mental and physical health and their ability to function throughout the rest of their life. The terrorism conviction and charge gives these students and parents a voice, and I thank you for hearing it. We also heard from the parents and family members who had their loved ones murdered that day, and we also heard from students and a teacher who were physically injured that day. And they were brave, and they told you a lot. But here's what they didn't tell you. Steve St. Juliana did not tell you about getting a call from me on December 1st, telling him about the charges that were being issued for the murder of his daughter when he was still trying to process that she was gone. Rob Baldwin, Madison's father, did not come here to tell you that he also got that same call and told myself and Mark that he had just been picking out a casket for his daughter, and that no matter what he cared about most and hoped most was that Madison was not in fear when she was killed. Craig Schilling did not tell you that when we first met with him, he sat in silence and could barely utter 10 words, and this was weeks after the shooting. Jill Suave, Justin's mother, did not tell you what it felt like to just a few months ago be given the sweatshirt Justin was wearing that day, and being grateful she had it, even if it had his blood still on it. Molly Darnell did not say that when we first met her, she said how hard it was to even come to our office because it was on the same grounds as the jail where the shooter was. Buck and Sherry Meir didn't tell you what it was like to finally hear during the Miller hearing what their son's last few minutes in this world were like when they heard Christy Gibson Marshall say she stayed with him, she talked to him, she told him he was loved. Nicole, Madison's mother, did not tell you that over a year ago she had the courage to come into our office and watch the video of Madison's last moments, though most of her support system told her not to. She did not say that watching her dear Madison crouch down against the wall with her hands over her head in terror as the shooter walked to her and shot her at close range, that it was like losing Madison all over again. Or when she asked to see the footage of just before the shooting 3 times and asked us to stop the image, holding her hands up to the screen, trying to memorize the way Madison's ponytail looked and the clothes she was wearing that day. Keegan did not share that the first time we met him was 2 years ago at his home. He was a foot shorter and at least 20 pounds less. He was wearing a hoodie and he wouldn't make eye contact. He seemed to be visibly shrinking from what had happened in that bathroom. In the 2 years that we have known him, he didn't stay in that same place. In fact, he refused to shrink. He grew, and he is stronger, which is remarkable given what we have asked of him, particularly in his testimony in the Miller hearing. We have been poring over these images and pictures and evidence for 2 years. We have watched and listened and provided support and communication the best we could to hundreds of these victims. The sheer force of the destruction, violence, trauma, and murder that the shooter caused that day did not stop at the doorway of Oxford High School. As you heard from so many students and parents, it was carried through the doors and out into the community. To every person who witnessed it, got a text from their child tried to assist or help. It went into their bedrooms and their homes, and it will be carried with them for the rest of their lives. The shock waves that we have had a front row seat to these past 2 years as prosecutors and victim advocates, it is indescribable. Indescribable. They've endured the hearings, the media reports, the delays, the appeals, more threats. They've been told that they weren't entitled to information about how this could happen at their school. They've watched us all diligently and thoroughly protect the due process rights of this shooter, which is critical, but also seemed unfair to them. They have had to take a back seat while lawyers, judges, school board members, commentators, and experts discuss what happened there as if they can somehow understand. We cannot understand. We do not understand. But we can give them the grace and dignity they deserve by listening today. And I thank the court for allowing that. And though I acknowledge, Your Honor, the great weight of the burden upon this court today, I urge you to also give them the justice they deserve. I ask that you sentence the defendant to life without parole. Thank you.
Thank you. Defense?
Yes, Your Honor, we'll start with the legal guardian ad litem, Ms. McKelvey.
Thank you. Ms. McKelvey?
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
Your Honor, approximately 2 years ago, I was appointed as Ethan's lawyer guardian ad litem because of the situation with his parents. I have been in a unique situation in the sense that I have gotten to know him as an individual from that day forward. Unfortunately, everyone, or almost everyone here, only knows him from the incident backwards. And we've heard some, he's a monster, he's trash. I have to tell you that he is a life. He is a human being. He is a person. And as an appointed attorney for the last 33 years, one of the things that I've learned through that practice is no matter what a defendant has done, they are a human being. They deserve respect. They deserve representation. But I don't lose track of the fact that they are a human being. And he is one. He was 15 years old when this occurred. I don't believe anyone on the defense side, including Ethan, has diminished the act that he did. No one. He has never diminished that. He chose to plead, and here we are for sentencing. He did not want anyone to have to go through any more than they have to. But he is not the same person that he was then. I have discovered that he is a bright young man. He is an artist. He is an historian. And there have been days where I have been oblivious of the fact that I have sat in a little cell in I-Block for 3 hours just talking to him. As the court knows, the jail is not designed for juveniles, so it's a very isolating experience. And so my role was more to keep him company, to not have him feel so isolated, to make sure that the needs he has, as every other individual who is housed at the Oakland County Jail has, and that they are being met. But his life is salvageable. His life is rehabilitatable. There was a book that I know was referenced during these proceedings, and I believe in the parents' proceeding as well. And it is written by Gillian Peterson and James Densley, both PhDs. And the book, the title is The Violence Project. And there was an interesting few sentences in there that struck me when I read it. They equated someone in crisis like a balloon full to bursting. When a balloon is inflated and stress or tension is applied, stretching the body over the air, the bigger the balloon gets, the more likely it is to pop. A fully inflated balloon becomes so fragile that it must be handled carefully or it will break. Prosecutor McDonald said there was a lot of failures here. It doesn't diminish what he did, but there were a lot of failures that someone could have deflated that balloon a bit, that could have potentially prevented this incident of occurring and us being here today facing the decision that you have to make. But to me, his life is worth salvaging. His life is worth rehabilitating. And as I know the court knows, all the lawyers in this room knows, that you have to fashion a sentence that is punishment, deterrence, protection, retribution, and rehabilitation. And if you look at him as a human being who is salvageable, who is rehabilitatable, then life in prison without parole is not the appropriate sentence. I have always been impacted by Brian Stevenson, who is the author of Just Mercy, A Story of Justice and Redemption, when he says, each of us is more than the worst thing that we have ever done. And I know everybody who spoke today probably cannot see that in Ethan, but his life is worth more than the worst thing he did, and what he did is probably the worst thing that anybody could do on the face of the earth. But I care about him, I know his team cares about him, and his life is worth not life in prison without parole, but is worth a term of years. And I ask you to sentence him to a term of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McKelvey. Ms. Laughlin?
Ms. Hopp will go next.
Thank you. Very briefly, Ms. Hopp, because I know that you all, I don't want your arguments to overlap, and so I'll listen to arguments, but go ahead, Ms. Hopp.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon.
My purpose in speaking today is to address two specific issues. First is the issue of making bombs for Hitler. I first became aware of this book because of media reports. As recently as Your Honor's opinion has mentioned this book because it was Ethan's favorite book. This book is published by Scholastic Publications, which, as Your Honor probably knows, and many people in this room do know, Scholastic is an organization, a company that specifically provides books to schools. They provide them to students in schools through those little newsprint flyers that come home once a month, once every other month, for parents to buy books for their children. They run book fairs in schools. They provide opportunities for teachers to buy their books to have in the classrooms. This book is about 200 pages. I've read it twice now. The age group that this book is geared toward is 9 to 12 years old. This is not, despite the title, and that's kind of why I'm addressing this book, it's not a pro-Hitler, pro-Nazi book. It's not a how-to on how to make bombs or anything of that sort. What this is a book based on the real-life stories of, in this particular case, a Ukrainian person who during World War II was kidnapped at the age of 9 and enslaved by the Nazis. These stories came to light after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. Ethan loves history. This book is about the 9-year-old main character who once was kidnapped, was thought of as a useless person because of her age by the Nazis who took her. She went on to arrive at the first work camp where she was enslaved, to be treated as, referred to, and called as subhuman solely because of her ethnicity, being Eastern European.
It follows her as she worked in the very brutal slave labor camps, as first in the laundry, then because of her, and I use quotes for these, deft tiny hands, attention to detail, and patience, was moved to the metalworks building of that work camp. At the metalworks building of that camp, they prepared the bombs that the Nazis used. Her specific job was to load those metal bombs with gunpowder. She and the 5 other girls, because they were all maybe 15, 13, 11, 9 years old, came up with the idea of replacing the gunpowder with the dirt around their work facility in order to purposely sabotage the bombs of the Nazis, because they were anti-Nazis. They were hoping for the day when the Allies would free them not only from Hitler, but from Stalin and his force or influence over the Ukrainian citizens. This is one book in a set of 3, each from a different perspective. This particular young lady had a younger sister whose life was very different. At the end, when the war was over, this book, as well as the second book, who's about a friend of hers from the camps, talk about going from camp to camp, looking to reunite families, and how they did that with messages. It also indicates that they weren't able to successfully return to their country of Ukraine or Russia, because under Russian law, at that point, Stalin considered them Nazis because they had worked in these enforced, enslaved labor camps. It's actually a very captivating series, and even as an adult, I enjoyed it. And I'll disclose I have a major in history, so history is also close to my heart. I can definitely see why, as somebody who enjoys history, Ethan would have liked this book. And again, because the title is so misleading about the contents of the book, I thought that was important to bring to the court's attention. Secondly, and I'm not going to detail or go over again the testimony of Dr. Romanowski from the Miller hearing, but I do want to talk about our prison system very briefly. The goal of our prison system is punishment and rehabilitation, and we know that because there are cells with doors that lock, but there are also programs. There are education opportunities, employment skills programs, job training programs, counseling programs, and even programs geared toward re-entry into society. There is a parole system, which Dr. Romanowski talked about, and I want to fill in a couple of blanks there. If given a term of years, which I am asking the court to do, Ethan would be eligible at the minimum number of years for parole. There is a board that would review his eligibility. Part of what they look at is a worksheet that includes all of the crimes he's committed, all of the programming he's participated in, and the extent to which he participated. It takes into account tickets and discipline that he incurred, if any, in the system, his mental health, And they also calculate the statistical risk of reoffending. This is all brought down to a number which tells them what risk Ethan or any other defendant in the prison system has of reoffending, low, medium, or high. And that's part of the basis of the parole board's decision. The other part depends on input from the prosecutor's office, input from victims and victims' families, an interview with the defendant, him or herself. The decisions of the parole board at one time used to be appealable. If parole is denied, the inmate can no longer appeal that decision. If parole is granted, however, the prosecutor's office has the opportunity to appeal that decision. The parole board is a specific group of individuals with expertise in parole. If a defendant or if Ethan has not been rehabilitated, parole is denied. And as Dr. Romanowski testified, in a situation such as Ethan's, it would be denied for probably a period of 5 years. There could be a situation where, depending on Ethan's participation, that he may be eligible for parole within the lower numbers if he were given a term of years. It could also be a situation where, depending on the parole board, he would not until he hit the maximum period sentence under a term of years. Considering the period that is currently under law, 60 years, plus the 2 years he would have to do as a felon using a firearm in the commission of the felony, he could be in prison for 62 years under the term of years Your Honor has as an opportunity or an option to impose today. That would put him at around age 77. So even a term of years is a very, very lengthy sentence and may likely be a life sentence. But what it does do is give Ethan the opportunity to demonstrate to everyone that he can be rehabilitated, that he is redeemable, and that he can make amends and contribute in a positive way to society upon his release. I join the comments made by Ms. McKelvey, as well as I'm sure those that Ms. Lofton will make. The Ethan I met 2 years ago is not the Ethan that sits here today for sentencing. He has made remarkable progress in addressing his issues. That's not to say he doesn't have a ways to go, because he does. But that's to say he's demonstrated that he can change himself for the better. And for those reasons, I ask Your Honor to consider a term of years as opposed to life without parole.
Thank you, Ms. Lofton.
Thank you.
Your Honor, nothing that I discuss is meant to be an attempt to take away from the pain and loss that we just heard about. The pain is palpable, it is real, and I don't mean to invalidate that with my comments. But as Ethan's defense attorney, my job is to tell this court what I know about Ethan and what I believe the sentence should be. We submitted a lengthy sentencing memorandum, and I know the court takes time to review all that, so I'm not going to repeat everything. But due to the gravity of this decision that the court will make, I want to highlight a few things. I would first like the court to know that Ethan is supported today by his aunt who came in from out of state. Also, a number of juvenile lifers were here this morning, but had to return back to work. I know that the court reviewed the letters that we submitted, and we ask that you continue to consider those prior to sentencing. I first met Ethan on December 4th of 2021. That day, I met a broken, an extremely sad and hopeless kid. He didn't look up. He didn't make eye contact. He barely spoke. In the first few months, I wasn't sure that we would actually make it to sentencing. He was depressed and still suffering from the mental illness that he came in with. After being arrested, he never saw the news or social media or the vigils that were held. He committed these acts and then was locked in a vacuum. When we had the initial placement hearing, it was the first time that he experienced the anger of his community and the pain that he caused. He did not take that lightly. Over the last 2 years, I have watched him go through all of the stages of grief. Ethan has never bragged about what he did. Ethan dreaded in court hearings because, unlike what has been said about him and what he wrote in that journal, he doesn't like attention. After being on medication and seeing a psychiatrist for 2 years, after having upwards of 175 visits with me, visits from Ms. Hopp and Ms. McKelvey, after talking to his aunt weekly, reading the Bible, reading novels, and spending so much time in solitary confinement, he is a different person. He has already made so many changes, and he is remorseful. He has been able to keep out the dark voices and thoughts. He sees the wrongs in his thinking and his actions. He has hope for the first time. He tries to be better every single day, and I am confident that he will continue to do that in the Michigan Department of Corrections, whatever your Honor's sentence may be. At the Miller hearing, the prosecutor introduced internet searches that Ethan made concerning punishment in Michigan. They also showed parts of his journal where he talks about a life in prison. Just because Ethan looked up what a life sentence is or what the punishment is for killing people does not mean that is the appropriate sentence under the law and under the facts that we are operating with. Would a healthy 15-year-old be okay with going to jail and prison for the rest of their life? Absolutely not. The fact that he even researched what his sentence could be and then still went forward with his actions only further shows how depressed and mentally ill he truly was. I want to talk a little bit about the journal. When you read Ethan's journal and you compare it to the notes from Dr. Anaker that we attached in our sentencing memorandum or the report of Dr. King, it sounds like a completely different person. And after meeting with Ethan for over 2 years, I now understand that the journal was the worst of the worst. It was an exaggeration of his thoughts. It was a place where he could say anything and there was no judgment. It was a sounding board without reverberation. He could make himself sound scary. He could make himself out to be a person that would be remembered. How do we know this to be true? We can look at the internet searches leading up to November 30th. We can also look at the step-by-step description of what was going on in his head that he gave Dr. Anaker. A few examples of the searches within a week or two of November 30th. Should you do something that scares you? What happens if you have depression and anxiety? What causes mental illness? Can you get in trouble for not doing homework? Am I a sociopath? Can hormones make you have bad thoughts? How to tell your doctor that you have depression? Can a therapist tell your parents? How to tell your parents you have depression? He was still trying to figure out what was going on with him. He acknowledged that something wasn't right, but he did not have the support or the connections with adults that could help him. So while just reading the journal and listening to his video the night before could leave you with the impression that this was a master plan that had been crafted for weeks without hesitation, I don't think the other evidence supports that. He struggled with his actions until the moment he came out of that bathroom. I want to touch briefly on the guidepost report, and I have never said that that report diminishes Ethan's culpability. Ethan pled guilty, not even no contest, and wanted to move directly to sentencing. Dr. Colin King, in his detailed report and while testifying, discussed implicit bias as a reason that the school acted in such a manner when dealing with Ethan. He came to this conclusion because nothing made sense about Ethan being sent back to class. We obviously, at that time, at the time of the Miller hearing, we were not privy to the inner workings of the district. But the guidepost evaluation and report goes so much deeper than the rationale of implicit bias. The report says the school failed Ethan. The report found that the school should have conducted both a threat assessment and a suicide intervention assessment in light of Ethan's conduct, and he should not have been sent back to class. The report says they had a student with recent mental health concerns raised by a teacher who previously had mostly flown under the radar at a big school with poor grades, fair attendance, and no serious discipline history. A student who now on back-to-back occasions violates school policy, first by viewing bullets, and then by watching a video of a guy gunning people down. That raises a serious red flag. It's not a close call. Ethan's concerning behaviors and statements at the very least might suggest physical violence or a threatening situation. So why is this relevant in this case and at this stage? Again, this report is not offered as an excuse or justification. This report is not offered to minimize the gravity, but we argue that this report, combined with the other things that we have mentioned, should persuade this court to a sentence of a term of years. If the professionals didn't recognize that he was on the precipice of a crisis, how do we then expect a mentally ill 15-year-old kid to be able to recognize that he was spiraling and come right out and ask for help? How can we expect a 15-year-old boy to tell a counselor that he had no relationship with his deepest, darkest secrets, the thoughts that took over his mind? Finally, I want to discuss rehabilitation. Montgomery versus Louisiana. While a sentencing court might encounter the rare juvenile offender who exhibits such irretrievable depravity that rehabilitation is impossible and life without the possibility of parole is justified, this penalty will be uncommon because of children's diminished culpability and heightened capacity for change. When there is no evidence that the defendant could not be rehabilitated, there is no reason to conclude that the defendant, like the great majority of youth, lacks the capacity to change and mature. People versus Taylor. No one has a crystal ball. And while it's impossible to say that Ethan will be able to be rehabilitated and be a productive member of society worthy of release, it will not be impossible to make that determination with decades of daily records of his behavior and human interaction. The parole board can evaluate everything that you do not have at this point to determine if he is rehabilitated. If you give Ethan a term of years, he will have to prove himself every single day. In my sentencing memorandum, I attached triumph reports from SATO that highlighted a number of juvenile lifers that were released under Miller. I also attached a number of letters from those same individuals who are supporting Ethan. In each of those cases, 20 to 30 years ago, a judge told them that they couldn't change, that they were irreparably corrupt, and they were wrong. Many of those individuals had no idea that the law would ever change or that they would get another chance to be released into society. Even knowing that, they did good things in prison. They took classes. They stayed out of trouble. They became better people. And when the laws changed and the court found that they could be released, they became productive members of society. Rehabilitation is possible, and those people are living proof. We are looking at the ability to be rehabilitated. We need not actually prove that complete rehabilitation has happened. He has participated each week in therapy and is on medication by his own choice. He has taken those initial steps to change. Ethan Crumbley is not the rare juvenile offender who exhibit such irretrievable depravity that rehabilitation is impossible and life without parole is justified. Your Honor, we ask that you sentence Ethan Crumbley to a term of years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Loughlin. With that, Mr. Crumbley, is there anything you would like to state before I pass sentence?
Your Honor, may he stand?
Yes, you may. Thank you. You may proceed.
I'd like to thank you for letting me speak, Your Honor. We are all here because of me today, of what I did. My actions were because of what I chose to do. I could not stop myself, but I am the one who led to why we are here today. I do not diminish any ability to anyone who could have stopped me, of anyone of a school or parents. They did not know, and I did not tell them what I planned to do, so they are not at fault of what I've done. I am a really bad person. I have done terrible things that no one should ever do. I have lied, been not trustworthy. I've hurt many people, and that's what I've done, and I'm not denying it, but that's not who I plan on to be. Whatever sentence it is, I do plan to be better than I am. I don't know if you'll believe that, but records of 15, 20, 25 years can show that I will change. Because it may not show it now with only 2 years of records, but I am trying. And all I want is for the people I hurt to just have a final sense of culpability that justice has somewhat been served in any capacity that they can recognize it with. Any sentence that they ask for, I ask that you do impose it on me, because I want them to be happy, and I want them to feel secure and safe, and I do not want them to worry another day, because I really am sorry for what I've done, for what I've taken of them. I cannot give it back, but I can try my best in the future to help other people, and that is what I will do. That's it. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. With that, this court has listened to extensive evidence in this case. I heard 4 days of testimony from the Miller hearing. I've presided over numerous placement hearings. I conducted the initial placement hearing in this case, and so the court is fully aware of the defendant's upbringing. I'm fully aware of the circumstances that brought him before the court. First, to the victims of the deceased, the court sends out its sincerest condolences to their family. To the injured victims and to those victims as it relates to count 1, terrorism causing death, thank you for your courage and strength in speaking today, as well as sending written correspondence. As counsel has pointed out, the court has read everything that you've submitted. I've read the defendant's sentencing memorandum. I've read the people's response thereto. I've read all of the exhibits that were attached, and I've read every single victim impact statement over the course of 3 days. Probably took me closer to 36 hours to read all of this, and so I've read everything and have gone back through the complete file. The letters truly gave the court a sliver of insight into the unique and amazing personalities of Justin, Hannah, Tate, and Madison. The court cannot begin to imagine the fear that the parents of those students at Oxford High School had on November 30th, 2021. I cannot even begin to fathom. To have to wait and mire to see if your loved one would return is heart-wrenching, and that's true terror. And not to have your loved one show up at Mire, the court could not imagine the pain. I know that whatever sentence the court imposes will not bring your loved one back or cure the mental anguish or lifelong physical scars that some of you have. But I hope that this sentence does allow you to close one chapter in your life. I also want to thank law enforcement that responded that day, because I know this has not been easy on them as well. As previously stated, the court has read defendant's sentencing memorandum and the people's response. Again, defense argues that the defendant should receive a term of years because of defendant's alleged mental illness. Defendants cite People v. Bennett 335 Mich. at 409, a 2021 case. The court notes that it is not saying because the defendant may be mentally ill that that automatically means he's irreparably corrupt. What the court notes is that he has an obsession with violence, that this act involved extensive planning, extensive research, and he executed on every last one of the things that he planned. As the court stated in its written opinion and order regarding the Miller hearing, defendant's alleged mental illness did not interfere with his ability to extensively plan for months his actions, nor did it interfere with his ability to execute those plans. This started with him asking for a better gun to conduct the school shooting. He had initially a .22 caliber weapon that he wrote would not do enough damage. And so weeks and weeks prior to this offense, he started to formulate this plan and knew and asked for the weapon that he could cause the most harm with. As counsel is aware, the goals of sentencing do not only involve rehabilitation, but also involve deterrence and punishment. Deterrence is two parts. It's private deterrence for the defendant in hopes that they would never commit an act like this again. But then there's also public deterrence, where the public sees the punishment that the individual has received in hopes that the public will never do anything like this in the future. The court has read the report from Guidepost Solutions. It was very lengthy. Respectfully, the court does not find this report to be mitigating in this case. The report simply points the finger at Oxford Public Schools. While the court agrees that more possibly could have been done, that issue is not properly before this court. We are here for sentencing based upon the defendant's actions, not the alleged shortcomings of others. As the defendant pointed out himself, he took responsibility. And he himself is not asking this court for a term of years. The court cannot underscore defendant's extensive planning and execution in this case enough. He practiced shooting at a gun range. He practiced racking and unracking the gun. And on November 30th, 2021, he could have chosen not to conduct the school shooting. When his parents were called to the school on that morning for his drawings, he could have said something then. He had a gun in his backpack at that time. When the school counselor advised the parents to please get him help within the next 48 hours, he could have stopped then and simply accepted the help that was going to be offered for him. Because according to the reports, his mother said that she'd get him the help. He could have changed his mind. Unfortunately, after shooting the first person, Phoebe Arthur, he could have changed his mind at that point. But he didn't. He continued to walk through the school, picking and choosing who was going to die. As the defendant said in his own words, this is nobody's fault but his own. He stated this afternoon that with help, that probably would not have stopped him. That is absolutely concerning to this court. The court apologizes to the victim for the bluntness, but defendant shot and killed Justin Schilling at point-blank range after having him get down on his knees in front of another student. He shot Hannah, who was already shot once before. He went up to her to finish the job by shooting her again. That is an execution. That is torture. He shot most people multiple times. And as he wrote, he did this for notoriety. And he wanted to go down in history as the biggest school shooter in Michigan history. The court cannot ignore the deep trauma defendant caused to the state of Michigan, but in particular the Oxford community. The court simply cannot ignore that. The court notes that teachers and students returned to Oxford High School after this tragic event. The court cannot even fathom or imagine walking through the halls of that school knowing that your fellow student, your friend, your classmate was killed in a restroom or in the hallway. Most, if not all, of the letters that I read advised the court that there are a significant number of people in Oxford that now have PTSD, that now have survivor's guilt, and deep depression that arose from this incident. Defendant's actions clearly created a new normal for all of the individuals involved, and all of those indirectly impacted as well. Unfortunately, this is what the defendant wanted, as he wrote in his journal. He wanted to see the impact of his crime, which is why he did not take his own life. Again, this goes back to the defendant's extensive planning. He chose not to die on that day because he wanted the notoriety. The terror that he caused in the state of Michigan and in Oxford is a true act of terrorism. Respectfully, defendant is the rare juvenile before this court. The court, having read the PSI and being fully familiar, but before I get that, I will also note that counsel brought up an issue of making bombs for Hitler. The court, that does not change the court's opinion about the defendant's obsession with violence. I thank Ms. Hopp for bringing that to my attention, but it still does not change the court's opinion about him being obsessed with violence, because his obsession was also outlined in the websites that he visited. His obsession was also outlined in his extensive drawings of violence. And his obsession continued, as I noted in the court's opinion in order, even while he was in the Oakland County Jail. With that, the court, having read the PSI and being fully familiar with the defendant and the underlying facts of this case, believes that it is in the best interest of justice as well as proportionate to the needs of this case to sentence defendant as follows. As it relates to docket 2022-279-506 FC, count 1, terrorism causing death. Sentences of the court is that defendant shall serve life without the possibility of parole, credit for 8 days served. Counts 2 through 5, homicide, first degree, premeditated murder, juvenile defendant. Sentence of the court is that defendant shall serve the rest of his life without the possibility of parole with the Michigan Department of Corrections, credit for 8 days served. On counts 6 through 12, assault with intent to murder. On each of the counts, defendant is sentenced to 18 years and 9 months to 80 years with the Michigan Department of Corrections, credit for 8 days served. On counts 13 through 24, those being felony firearm, defendant is sentenced to 2 years with the Michigan Department of Corrections on each of those counts with credit for 730 days served. Counts 1 through 12 are concurrent to each other, and counts 13 through 24 are concurrent to each other. Count 1 is consecutive to count 13, count 2 is consecutive to count 14, count 3 is consecutive to count 15, count 4 is consecutive to count 16, count 5 is consecutive to count 17, count 6 is consecutive to count 18, count 7 is consecutive to count 19, count 8 is consecutive to count 20, count 9 is consecutive to count 21, count 10 is consecutive to count 22, count 11 is consecutive to 23, and count 12 is consecutive to count 24. All of those consecutive counts are by reason of the felony firearm statute. Is there a challenge to restitution here?
There is not, Your Honor.
Thank you. Restitution will be set in the amount of $20,781. State costs will be set in the amount of $1,632. You are not to have any contact with Oxford High School or enter Oxford High School. You are not to have any contact whatsoever with the families of Madison Baldwin, Tate Meyer, Hannah St. Juliana, and Justin Schilling. Also, you are not to have any contact with the following victims or their families, that being Phoebe Arthur, John Osito, Molly Darnell, Riley France, Elijah Mueller, Kylie Osage, Aiden Watson, and Keegan Gregory. And I will note that restitution is payable to the Crime Victims' Right Compensation Program. With that, Michigan Department of Corrections, did I miss anything?
Your Honor, may I ask the court to order 130 crime victims fee, $60 DNA cost, and DNA testing?
Thank you. DNA cost is $60, Crime Victims' Right fee at $130. Did I miss anything else?
DNA testing, Your Honor.
DNA testing is hereby ordered. Thank you. With that, Mr. Crumbley, you are entitled to file an application for leave to appeal. If you are financially unable to retain a lawyer, the court will appoint a lawyer to represent you on appeal. The request for a lawyer must be filed within 42 days after sentencing. Your attorney is going to be handing you an appellate rights form, sir. Do you acknowledge receipt of the appellate rights form?
Your Honor, I have tendered that to my client. He has signed it, and I will tender it to the court.
Thank you very much. With that, counsel, anything else for the record?
Not from people, thank you.
Nothing from defense. Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. With that, deputies, you may take Mr. Crumbley. To those in the gallery, please be seated until he is exited. With that, thank you all. The court will stand in recess.
All rise.